February 2020. A dense, frigid air enveloped the abandoned Packard plant, just a few miles from downtown Detroit, Michigan. The beam from Inspector Leon Briggs' flashlight cut through dusty corridors and rusted steel, illuminating thick frost clinging to cracked cement walls. Dispatch: I need forensics and an excavation team at the old Packard plant. Suspicious signs under the scrap pile on the west side. His voice echoed in the empty space, swallowed by the howling wind through warped steel frames. What began as a routine cold case survey had now become a turning point in Michigan's investigative history. Something had been uncovered. Something that would answer a question Detroit had carried for over 40 years. Beneath the cold earth and scrap metal, the forensic team found bone fragments, oil-stained beige fabric, and copper wire twisted around a decayed plastic bag. Every clue pointed to one name: Janine Halloran, the young librarian who vanished mysteriously in the winter of 1979. For 4 decades, Janine's disappearance remained an open wound in Detroit's police records. She left the library one snowy evening, returned to her Jefferson Avenue apartment, and then vanished forever. 3 days later, her silver Chevy Nova was found burned out behind the Packard plant. No body, no trace. No one was arrested. No one knew the truth. Case file hash D79114 was shelved, left dormant in the Lansing archives. But 42 years later, a dried blood sample from that car was reanalyzed with modern DNA technology. And the results changed everything. The blood matched the criminal profile of a man questioned and overlooked in 1979. Darren Cole, a young mechanic who knew Janine, now in his 70s, living quietly in Ohio. Before continuing this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video. Your support helps us bring cold cases, stories thought forgotten, back into the light of justice. Because the discovery at the Packard plant didn't just close a missing person case, it was the first domino in a decades-long chain of events, exposing secrets Detroit had tried to bury in silence. And when authorities finally identified the suspect and made an arrest after 42 years, it wasn't a stranger or a monster in the shadows. It was someone who had lived among them, fixed their cars, shook their hands every morning, and carried a horrific secret for half a lifetime. The Halloran case isn't just a mystery solved. It's a reminder of the persistence of investigators who never gave up, the scientific advancements that gave a voice back to the departed, and the power of justice, delayed but never gone. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always curious to know how far these stories reach and how they connect us through time and memory. Tonight, we'll return to Detroit in the winter of 1979, tracing Janine Halloran's disappearance and exploring the 42-year journey. A journey that brought a case thought dead back to justice. This is a story of loss, silence, perseverance, and ultimately, justice delayed, but never forgotten. Detroit, late 1979. The city was cloaked in a thin layer of ice, like the dust of time, with old factories lying still in the fog, their rusted smokestacks exhaling warm vapor from the earth. On Jefferson Avenue, streetlights cast a mournful golden glow onto the snow. Janine Halloran, 25, a librarian at Detroit East High School, closed the last borrowing ledger of the day, said goodbye to the security guard, and bundled into her heavy coat to head to the parking lot. She was a cautious woman, soft-spoken, always carrying a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. Her breath turned to mist as she opened the door of her silver Chevy Nova. The car's FM radio played Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, Stevie Nicks' voice humming softly like a breath in the cold wind. She drove through empty streets, neon lights shimmering on her windshield. As the Nova turned into the narrow alley leading to her 3-story apartment building, the clock neared the end of the evening. A hallway bulb flickered, then the door closed behind her. No one saw Janine again. The next morning, the library opened, but her desk was empty. Her home phone rang repeatedly, unanswered. By afternoon, her mother, Rose Halloran, a former Packard plant worker, drove her old car to her daughter's apartment. Snow blanketed the steps. The door was unlocked. The lights were on, a small radio in the living room played music, and on the table sat a half-empty coffee cup, its surface skimmed over with cold. Her heavy coat hung on a hook, her purse and keys still in a drawer by the door. Rose walked through the small apartment, calling her daughter's name amid the howling wind slipping through window cracks. No response, only the faint clink of metal from an old heater. She stood still for a moment, staring at the unfinished room. Everything as if abandoned mid-thought, then stepped into the hallway to the payphone by the stairs. Rose lifted the receiver, dialed the police. Her voice trembling amid rapid breaths. "Dispatch. I need to report a missing person. My daughter, Janine Halloran, isn't home." Outside, a blizzard raged, red lights from a patrol car, reflecting on frosted glass, flickering in the closing Detroit night, as if swallowing a name. When police arrived, snow had blanketed the sidewalk. Sergeant Frank Mulroney was the first to step across the threshold. His cap wet with snow, his breath forming white clouds. With him was Detective Dana Bishop, younger, precise, carrying a leather notebook and a Polaroid camera. They were led to apartment 2B, door still open, hallway light casting into the cold void. Rose sat on a wooden chair by the kitchen, clutching a wool scarf. "I didn't touch anything," she said softly. Mulroney nodded, scanning the room. The weak yellow light fell on damp tiles, creating a glow both warm and weary. The small apartment was quiet, and that quiet felt unnatural. The radio was still on. The tape paused mid-asterisk, Dreams asterisk, by Fleetwood Mac, the song cut off mid-note, leaving a monotonous hum. A chair lay tilted on the floor, the phone cord pulled askew from its socket, dangling. Bishop crouched, shining her flashlight on a faint smudge on the floor, a diagonal streak blurred by damp dust. No blood, no clear footprints, but a sense that someone had been held, struggled, and then vanished. In the bedroom, the bed was neatly made, pillows aligned, no sign of a hurried departure. The coat, purse, and keys remained by the door. Mulroney opened the fridge, finding an unopened milk carton, a wrapped plate of food. He closed it, jotting briefly, did not leave voluntarily. Rose said her daughter was punctual, read books, had no boyfriend, no debts, never stayed out overnight. When Bishop asked about frequent visitors, Rose hesitated, mentioning a young man, Darren, a mechanic near the school, who'd fixed Janine's silver Nova a few times. The name was noted, circled. They went down the hallway, knocking on doors. A woman upstairs heard a heavy thud, thought it was a cat knocking something over. Man downstairs saw a light flash in the apartment at night, but heard no footsteps. No one saw Janine leave the building. Outside, snow fell heavily, covering the patrol car's hood. Bishop photographed the Halloran 2B nameplate, the flash reflecting off peeling paint. They collected small items, the phone cord, the cassette tape, the half-empty coffee cup, sealed in paper bags. Everything was too clean, too still, as if the room had been preserved to hide something. As they left, Rose stood by the door, eyes fixed on the apartment's light, as he said softly, "We'll find her." But even she felt the words fall into the cold air and dissolve. In the courtyard, Mulroney paused, looking at the second-floor window, where golden light spilled through frosted glass. He wrote a final note in his report. Missing adult, suspicious circumstances. Then he closed the notebook, adjusted his cap, and stepped into the street. Cold wind swept down Jefferson, snow covering the license plate of the police. Nova parked at the curb. A young officer stood guard, hands in pockets, looking up at the small window with the Halloran nameplate. Inside, the bulb still burned, yellow and tired, like an eye that refused to close, waiting for someone to return. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but the air remained thick with cold. Apartment 2B was sealed, yellow tape swaying in the wind like a silent warning. Mulroney and Bishop returned, bringing a K-9 unit and 2 technicians. The German Shepherd, Ranger, trained to track human scent, started at the apartment's threshold. It sniffed the doorway, circled the living room, then barked softly, pulling hard on the leash toward the hallway. Bishop followed, noting the path. Ranger traced the scent down the stairs, through a damp, cold corridor smelling of old paint and wind seeping through wooden door cracks. The trail led to the rear parking lot, where snow had piled up overnight. The dog circled, nose to the ground, then stopped at the lot's edge. Mulroney crouched, looking under fresh snow, faint double tire tracks, small, as if a car had stopped and turned sharply toward the main road. He jotted quickly. Tire marks, southbound, fresh, covered. Bishop photographed, measuring the distance between the tracks with a stick. 56 inches, could be a sedan, she said. Same as her car. Snow buried what remained, but it was their only lead. As technicians collected snow samples and photographed the scene, Mulroney asked the building manager about security cameras, but there were none. Had one last year, the manager said, broke, no one fixed it. Everything seemed to conspire in the girl's disappearance. The weather, the city, the indifference of those nearby. That afternoon, the search widened. A taxi driver, Howard Dean, reported that on the night of the incident, he was parked 2 blocks from Janine's building on Jefferson, waiting for fares. Through his windshield, he saw a man smoking by the back gate, brown leather jacket, tall, head slightly bowed. When asked for details, Howard only recalled, he stood there a while, then melted into the dark. No one was with him, no notable car. The statement was logged. While reviewing Janine's belongings, Bishop opened a small drawer by the phone. Among notes and bills, she found a small black notebook listing personal contacts, classmates, co-workers, a few shop numbers near the school. On the second page, in neat handwriting, D. Cole, Auto Service. Bishop pointed to it, whispering, this could be a lead. Mulroney nodded, flipping through the city directory for an address. East Side Auto Service, Gratiot Avenue, about 5 miles from the apartment. Mechanic, he muttered. If he worked on her car, he might have a spare key. They checked Janine's car maintenance records. The Chevy Nova was serviced twice that year, both at the same shop. Invoices, signed D. Cole. Mulroney folded the paper slowly, his voice hoarse from the cold. We need to talk to this guy. That afternoon, they returned to the station, reporting findings. In a small room, a dim white light, shown on a Detroit map, spread across the wall. Bishop marked points: apartment, parking lot, tire tracks, taxi witness. The lines formed a crooked triangle. At the lowest point, she circled East Side Auto Service. If he serviced her car, he knew her routine, her work hours when she got home. He could have entered the lot without suspicion, Bishop said. Mulroney stood by, staring silently at the map, then nodded. He picked up the desk phone, dialing an internal line. I want a summons, he said. Name Darren Cole, male about 29, mechanic, Gratiot Avenue address. Outside, snow began falling again. White flakes erased the tire tracks they'd seen that morning. In the hallway, a night shift officer's shadow stretched across the wall. Detroit sank into a pale gray night, while in the room, only the scratch of a pen on paper remained, logging the faint trail to a single name. The next morning, with snow still on the patrol car's hood, Darren Cole arrived at the station per the summons. He came alone, on time, in a brown leather jacket stained with oil, holding a cap, a faint smell of gasoline trailing him. His stance was steady, steps unhurried, eyes unflinching. Bishop watched through the one-way glass in the interrogation room, noting, confident, no fear. When Mulroney entered, Cole gave a faint, polite but emotionless smile. Do you know why we asked you here? Mulroney began. Cole shrugged. I heard Miss Halloran went missing. Shame. She was a good person. His voice was even, smooth, rehearsed. Bishop opened her notebook, placing a car repair invoice on the table. You work at Eastside Auto Service? Yeah. Was Miss Halloran a regular? Not really. Fixed her car twice, oil and brakes. We chatted. That's it. Bishop tilted her head. Where were you the night she disappeared? Cole met her gaze, a thin smile. Home, watching TV. The answer came without pause. Mulroney nodded slowly. Writing. Alone? Alone. Anyone confirm that? No one. I live alone. The room's air thickened. The fluorescent light glinted off the table, reflecting oil sheen on his hands. Bishop noticed a long scratch on Cole's left wrist, the skin red, freshly healed. Where'd that come from? She asked. Bumped a car engine yesterday, he said, tone steady. She held his gaze, silent. In the file, a neighbor reported seeing Cole's car leave his garage late that night. When Mulroney asked, Cole smiled faintly. Might have taken out the trash. People missee things at night. No tremor, no wandering eyes, just excessive control. Mulroney said slowly, you know, everyone makes small mistakes, but lies show on the face. Cole shrugged. If I'd done something wrong, I wouldn't be sitting here so calmly. The words hung in the narrow room, joined only by the scratch of a pen. When the interview ended, Mulroney signaled Bishop to follow. They left the room, standing by a window overlooking the parking lot. Well? He asked. Too calm, Bishop replied. No evasion, no fear. Like he knows we've got nothing. Mulroney nodded slightly. And that scratch, not from an engine, sharp-edged, like a table corner or fingernails. He glanced through the glass, where Cole sat still, hands clasped, staring into space. No guilt, but no empathy either. That afternoon, they visited the garage where Cole worked. The roll-up door was half open, the air thick with gasoline. On the concrete floor, fresh white marks gleamed, the ceiling bulb casting dim light on the wet surface. Everything was too neat, tools spotless. No oil dust, no tire marks. Mulroney walked the floor, sniffing, metallic cleaner. Who cleaned this? He asked. The shop owner, an old man with white hair. Darren, this morning, said he wanted to tidy up. Bishop stayed quiet, eyeing a still wet streak along a drainage groove. In the corner, an industrial trash bin was empty, no rags or oily cloths. He cleaned too thoroughly, she said softly. Or he's hiding something. Back in the car, Mulroney was silent for a moment. He rolled down the window, letting cold air dispel the lingering cleaner smell on his coat. He's confident because he knows we don't have anything, Bishop said. Right, Mulroney replied. And because he thinks he's wiped it all clean, he opened his notebook, writing a short line, garage floor, heavy gas smell, unusually clean. The script slanted, the pen pressed harder than usual. Late afternoon, they returned to the station. The interrogation room was empty. The chair where Darren sat still, marked with the imprint of his oil-stained jacket. Without an arrest warrant, they couldn't hold him. Mulroney looked at the report, then folded it and slipped it into the case file. Release him, he said curtly. Bishop glanced at him, hesitant. Do you really think he's involved? He didn't answer immediately. The hallway lights flicked on, their yellow glow reflecting off the metal table. Finally, he said softly, when someone cleans up that thoroughly, it means something bad happened. Darren left the station before full dark. His steps were slow, head slightly bowed, his shadow stretching long across the slushy snow. As the door closed behind him, only the scratch of Mulroney's pen remained on the notebook page, a first, small but sharp suspicion, like a cut, marking the start of a long chain of unanswered days. 4 days after the interrogation, Detroit remained locked in thick ice. The sky was overcast, winds from the Detroit River blowing back a heavy mix of metal and exhaust fumes. Near noon, a volunteer search group rallied by local police, 3 Jefferson Avenue residents, decided to expand their sweep to the abandoned industrial zone south of the city. There, along East Grand Boulevard, lay the old Packard Plant, thousands of square feet of cracked concrete, empty warehouses, and wind whistling through rusted iron frames with a droning hum. One of the 3, a young man named Larry Knox, caught an unusual burnt smell while passing a vacant lot behind a barbed wire fence. He followed a black streak on the snow, then stopped. Before him was a charred car frame, its shell melted, windshield shattered, a silver Chevy Nova, identifiable by a fragment of the logo, still clinging to the warped hood. Larry stepped back, hands trembling, and called the police. Within 20 minutes, Mulroney and Bishop arrived. The patrol car's siren echoed through the empty factory grounds, reverberating in the hollow space. They cordoned off the area with caution tape, setting up temporary scene markers. Mulroney knelt, brushing away a thin layer of snow around the car's frame. The smell of gasoline lingered, mixed with burnt rubber. The chassis was blackened, the driver's door ajar. The driver's seat was reduced to twisted steel springs, edges singed, burn marks spreading from the floor beneath the gearshift. Bishop, gloved, shone her flashlight inside. The floor was coated in gray ash, patches of metal corroded. Near the gearshift, she spotted a dark red stain, dried and hardened. "Blood," she said, her voice roughened by the wind. A few inches away, a scrap of beige fabric, frayed, stained with black oil. She clipped it into a plastic evidence bag, labeled #04. In the door pocket, melted plastic revealed a warped cassette tape. Its label faded, but still legible, Fleetwood Mac, Dreams. Mulroney circled the car, studying the dirt path leading to the lot. The tire tracks were fresher than those of old industrial vehicles. Deep ruts formed in the muddy snowmelt. "Not an accident," he said. "Someone parked it here, doused it with gas, and lit it." Bishop nodded, scanning the area. No bottles, no lighters, no clear footprints, just the smell of smoke and blackened snow. They called in the forensic team. While waiting, Mulroney leaned down to sniff the burn marks. Pure gasoline, no trace of engine oil. The fire, aimed directly at the driver's compartment, suggested an intent to erase evidence, not to cause an explosion. When the forensic team arrived, the sun was dipping. They set up a temporary tent, switching on high-powered lights. The temperature dropped fast, breath rising like fog. A technician photographed the scene, noting angles, wind direction, and time. They scraped ash from around the brake pedal, collected paint residue, and a bent copper wire. No body or personal items were found. No purse, no documents, no biological traces remained. As Bishop stepped back, the lights hit the car's frame, its metal gleaming in the dark like a blackened skeleton. To her, everything was too quiet. No sirens, no passers-by, only the wind sweeping through the rubble. "What do you think?" she asked. Mulroney stood beside her, hands in his heavy coat pockets, eyes following a faint gleam on the door's glass. "I think this isn't a missing person case anymore," he said slowly. "This is a crime." The news broke the next morning. The Detroit Free Press ran a small headline on page 2. "Detroit Librarian missing, car found burned in industrial zone." No large photo, just a brief summary. The vehicle belonging to Janine Halloran, 25, was discovered burned in the abandoned Packard Plant area. No body found. Police are continuing the investigation. At the station, phones rang incessantly. Reporters asking questions, citizens offering tips, most just rumors. Mulroney brushed them aside, focusing on the scene report. In his notes, he detailed burned chassis, driver's door open, dried blood near gear shift, beige fabric with oil, partially burned cassette, strong gasoline smell. No body. That afternoon, as forensics wrapped up, they covered the car frame with a tarp and towed it to the examination center. Bishop lingered a moment, watching. She saw footprints mixed with police boot marks in the snow around the lot, all tangled, as if time had stomped over the scene to erase the truth. She recalled the apartment, the toppled chair, the yanked phone cord, the cold coffee, and saw it all connect in a chilling sequence. A girl vanished, an empty room, now a burned car. One question looped in her mind: who would need to burn an empty car? Mulroney didn't answer when she asked, only stared down the road leading out of the industrial zone. The wind tore at the caution tape on the fence, clanging like metal on metal. He shoved his hands into his pockets, looking toward the boulevard. Whoever did this knew how empty this place is. No one hears, no one sees, and they've definitely done it before. As night fell, they left the scene. In the rearview mirror, the technician's flashlights still swept over the black frame, weak beams flickering on the snow, then fading. The city sank into darkness, leaving only the smell of gasoline, smoke, and a cold that lingered like the end of a name in a Detroit winter afternoon. The Detroit Police Department's forensic lab, sat in an old brick building, its basement thick with the smell of chemicals and metal, low-hanging fluorescent lights casting a cold glow on stainless steel tables. 3 days after recovering the Chevy Nova, the evidence was brought here. Mulroney and Bishop were present as a technician opened the first sealed bag, label #04, beige fabric, oil-stained, collected from driver's seat area. Beside it was a bag with dried blood scraped from the gear shift. All were dated, timed, and signed by the examiner. The room was nearly silent, only the hum of a centrifuge and the clink of a scalpel cutting samples. Mulroney stood by, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the log sheet. He knew the results might yield little, but he hoped for something unusual, a hair, a fingerprint, anything indicating a human presence. The technician, an older man named Howard Kepler, placed the blood sample on a slide, adding reagent. The liquid turned dark brown, then bright red. Type O, he said quietly. Bishop asked, "Can it be identified?" Kepler shook his head. O is the most common type. 1/3 of the population has it. If we're lucky, we know it's human blood, but it proves nothing about who. He noted it in the log, hands still gloved, carefully labeling. Next was the beige fabric. Under a microscope, the fibers were thick, coated with black oil. Quick analysis showed it was industrial carpet, used in garages or warehouses, mass-produced, sold widely across the state. No logo, no identifying code. Bishop looked at Mulroney, same carpet as his shop. Mulroney nodded, but his eyes darkened. There are hundreds of garages in this city. The lab could go no further. In 1979, DNA testing didn't exist, nor did digital fingerprint databases. Prints lifted from the car's charred surface were smudged, distorted, matching no records in the old criminal files. A young forensic tech tried photographing them, printing faint images, but only got a series of incomplete swirls. "Unidentifiable," he said, voice tired. Mulroney stood there, hearing the phrase for the 3rd time that day. He knew it meant the case was slipping toward hopeless. That afternoon, they shifted to Janine's personal items, purse, wallet, notebook. But none were in the car. Nothing remained to cross-reference. Bishop asked Kepler about reconstructing the fire's sequence. He pointed to a sketch of the car's frame. Fire started at the driver's floor. Temperature reached over 800 degrees, enough to melt aluminum. The source was gasoline, poured directly. No electrical spark, Mulroney concluded. Deliberate arson. No one disagreed, but no one had more to prove it. 2 days later, they got a warrant to search Darren Cole's home. The garage on Gratiot Avenue had gray concrete walls and a metal roll-up door. When police arrived, Darren calmly opened it, inviting them in. "Go ahead and look," he said, voice indifferent. Inside, the floor was clean, oil stains meticulously wiped. Tools hung neatly. In a corner, an empty gas can leaned against a metal cabinet. Bishop pointed, "When did you use that?" Darren replied, "Last week, filled a customer's car. Police seized it, labeled it, sent it for analysis. Result, standard gasoline, no unique additives, no source traceable. His home had no burned clothes, no blood-stained items, no fresh gasoline traces. Everything was too clean." As they left, Mulroney paused at the garage door, eyeing the still wet floor. He said to Bishop, "That's strong a gas smell, and he says it was used last week. He's lying, but we've got no proof." Bishop exhaled, her breath white in the cold. If it's him, he's smart, or just lucky with the timing. She knew without DNA or footage, they had only a hunch, nothing a court would accept. That evening, Mulroney returned to the station, sitting in a small office with a window overlooking the river. He spread the case file on the desk. Scene photos, forensic reports, witness statements, garage search notes, all neatly stacked, half an inch thick, but no piece connected. He picked up his pen, writing the final line of the interim report. Type O blood, unidentifiable, beige fabric, industrial carpet, no personal items, no fingerprints, no body. At the page's end, he added insufficient basis to criminalize the case. The next day, the report went to the prosecutor's office. The response was swift and cold. No victim, no crime. Cannot prosecute. Bishop read it, silent. Mulroney crumpled the paper, setting it back on the desk. He said softly, almost to himself, no body, no prints, no chance. She didn't reply, just looked outside, snow falling again, flakes slanting in the yellow light. All they had was a burned car, an unnamed bloodstain, and a man who knew when to stay silent. Before leaving the office, Mulroney opened the file once more, labeling it pending. The papers were placed in a metal cabinet drawer, marked D79-114. He closed it, the metal clanging sharply, echoing down the long hallway. That night, Detroit was strangely quiet. Wind from the river carried a cold mist, lingering like something unspoken, suspended in the room, in a case left hanging. Spring 1980 came late. Snow melted slowly, the city gray and slick, streets mottled with oily puddles. 6 months had passed since the Chevy Nova was towed from the Packard plant, but Janine Halloran's file remained on Sergeant Frank Mulroney's desk. The reports had no conclusion, only repeated phrases, unidentified, no evidence, insufficient criminal elements. Beside him, an old typewriter clacked steadily, as if clinging to the rhythm of a case everyone knew was running dry. Bishop now worked in another precinct, handling car thefts and financial cases. In a letter to him, she wrote briefly, "Some cases don't end, they're just left behind." Mulroney read it multiple times, then folded it, tucking it into the file. Through the summer, police got sporadic calls. Someone saw a woman like Janine at a gas station. Another reported meeting her at an out-of-town diner. All were checked, all false. Each time, Mulroney pulled her portrait from the file, studying the calm face under dusty glass, then returned it. He didn't know why he kept the habit, perhaps unwilling to admit the case was dead. A new police chief took over, wanting to clear pending files from the roster. "If there's no new evidence, move them to storage," he said, voice flat. "Old cases can't clog the system." Mulroney objected, but it was futile. In early September, the order came, case D79-114. Inactive, missing person, presumed dead. Darren Cole, the man they'd suspected, left Detroit soon after police returned his gas can and ended the questioning. Immigration records showed he moved to Toledo, Ohio, working at a small auto shop. No one bothered to follow up. Insufficient grounds for surveillance, an internal report noted. Mulroney knew he was gone but could do nothing. In the final meeting on the Halloran case, a young officer asked, "What if he comes back?" Mulroney replied, "Then someone else will ask that question for me." As fall arrived, hopeless files were moved to the basement. The storage room was damp, lit by yellow bulbs, smelling of old paper and rusted cabinets. Mulroney carried Janine's thin file down himself. On the brown cover, written in black marker, "Missing person D79-114, Halloran, J." He placed it among hundreds of others, then closed the cabinet. The metal clanged sharply, resonating in the cramped space. He stood still, hand on the cold cabinet. In his mind, he saw the toppled chair, the yanked phone cord, the dried blood in the burned car. 3 disconnected pieces, never to align. Outside, Detroit was changing. The Packard plant was fully sealed off, residents moved away, and the neighborhood around Jefferson grew quieter. New cases flooded in, street violence, drug trafficking, armed robberies. The criminal division was busier than ever, and no one mentioned the missing librarian anymore. Mulroney was reassigned to a different unit, handling financial crimes. He didn't protest, just silently cleared his desk, removing the last pinned crime scene photo from the wall. Before leaving the room, he wrote a short sentence on the final page of his work notebook. "Burned car, real blood, person gone." The slanted text, in green ink, smudged slightly from his trembling hand. That winter, a new layer of snow blanketed the city. Street lights shone through the falling flakes, illuminating the freezing Detroit River. In the basement of the police station, the iron filing cabinet stood closed, with the thin Halloran file tucked in the middle drawer. forgotten among thousands of other missing persons cases. Only the distant sound of patrol cars echoed through the window, blending with the wind, a faint reminder that some cases never end. People just stop looking. By 1985, Detroit's decline was stark. Factories shut down en masse, and the streets around Jefferson and Gratiot sank into a lingering silence, like a chronic illness. In the Central Precinct's police building, Frank Mulroney sat alone in his office, facing a cardboard box, holding the Halloran case file, now yellowed with age. He was nearing retirement, preparing to hand over all old cases to the state archives. Janine's file, thin, under 50 pages, lay on top. He opened it one last time: forensic reports, crime scene photos, interrogation notes, and his handwritten note from years ago. Burned car, real blood, person gone. The green ink had faded, the paper yellowed, but the handwriting remained clear. He sat still for a long time, then closed it, slipping his hand into his coat pocket to pull out an old lighter and light a cigarette. The smoke curled into the dim afternoon sunlight, filtering through the window, creating a scent both warm and weary. On his final afternoon before the handover, the forensic team returned the evidence bags. Each was labeled by number 04, beige fabric, 05, dried blood sample, 06, partially burned cassette. All were resealed in clear plastic tape, relabeled, evidence hash 114. Case D79-114. On each bag, the technician's and Mulroney's signatures overlapped in black ink. He looked at the slanted Halloran J on the label, his hand brushing the stiff nylon, cold, like touching a piece of memory. Late that afternoon, the transport van arrived. They boxed up the files, numbered them, and loaded them onto a silver-gray metal truck. There was no farewell ceremony, no mention of the case. Mulroney personally signed the transfer log, his signature shaky but neat. As the van pulled away, he stood watching it disappear around the corner, carrying the missing person case he'd pursued for 6 years. An early autumn wind blew, sending a stray transfer sheet from his hand tumbling onto the steps. At the Lansing State Archives, the boxes were taken to the basement. The vast space, lit by weak fluorescent bulbs, was coated in thick dust on wooden shelves. A technician logged each box, labeling it by year and case number. The D79-114 file was placed on the third shelf, between two other missing persons cases, D78092, Benson, L and D80017, Cooper R. The hash 114 evidence bag sat in a metal box, resealed with a thin lid wire. When the archive door closed, the metal hinges echoed, then faded into silence. In the years that followed, no one reopened it. The press forgot, personnel changed, and Janine Halloran's file became just a line on an unsolved case list. Mulroney retired in December, moving to a small apartment in suburban Dearborn. He took with him an old notebook, containing only a few lines about the Halloran case, the only memory he didn't surrender. Whenever he heard of a missing person on the radio, he recalled the black and white photo of the girl, her gentle, distant gaze. He wondered if he'd missed something, or if time had simply buried it all. In the Lansing archive, winter brought a chill that seeped through brick walls. On the wooden shelves, hundreds of file bags stacked up, their paper labels torn, dust layering thickly. Among them, the small Halloran J label faded with time, lost amid countless other names, people who also vanished without a trace. The light at the end of the hallway flickered, reflecting briefly on the nylon of evidence bag hash 114, glinting faintly before going dark. No one witnessed that moment, and no one remembered the case anymore. In Detroit, the next winter arrived, and a name that once kept an entire criminal division awake now existed only in the shadows of a storage room, where dust coated justice like a thick layer of untouched snow. January 2020, snow fell again on Detroit, heavy and thick as it had years ago. In the modern Michigan State Police building in Lansing, the third-floor meeting room had been converted into the hub of a new project, the Cold Case Unit, Michigan's first, established to review unsolved missing persons and homicides spanning 4 decades. The room's walls were lined with black and white photos, victims, crime scenes, faded evidence. Among the stacked files, one name stood out on a brown cover: Halloran Janine, missing person #D79114. Inspector Leon Briggs, 58, hair prematurely gray, had been a young officer in Detroit. He knew the Halloran name from stories passed down in the force: a missing person, a burned car, and a veteran detective haunted by the phrase, burned car, real blood, person gone. As a trainee, he'd seen the file in storage, dust-covered. Now, as head of the cold case unit, he chose to open it first. "There's biological evidence," Briggs told his team, "and that's enough to start." They retrieved metal box #114 from the archive, its lead seal intact, bearing the faded signature F. Mulroney. Opening it released a mix of old paper and nylon smells. Inside were 3 evidence bags: beige fabric, a burned cassette, and dried blood. On the outside, handwritten in faint green ink, blood sample from gear shift area. Briggs, gloved, lifted a bag, the LED light reflecting off the nylon. 40 years, and it's still intact, he said softly. In the modern forensic lab, technicians placed the sample in a DNA extraction chamber. 2020 technology allowed analysis of partially burned cells, impossible in 1979. The process took nearly 12 hours. Data was sent directly to the state's Genetic Analysis Center. The team waited in silence, the green glow of screens reflecting on their faces. Briggs sat at the table, the open file before him. Photos of the burned nova, dried blood by the gear shift, oil-stained fabric, typewritten forensic reports. All were echoes from a distant past, now pulled back to the present. A week later, the results came. The report, printed from the National Sogoda system, had a white cover and clear black text. DNA match found, male profile. The DNA matched a criminal record from Ohio. Darren Cole, born 1950, convicted of second-degree murder as a juvenile in 1963. Briggs read slowly, his pulse steadying. The details noted, released 1968. No further record. He sat still for a long time, eyes fixed on Darren Cole. A name noted in an investigation notebook 40 years ago, the mechanic questioned, never charged, who vanished from Detroit after the case stalled. "Too perfect to be coincidence," Briggs said, voice low. He called the cold case team to the meeting room, spreading the file on the table. "The Halloran case has male blood in the burned car, type O, unidentifiable back then. Now, DNA matches Cole, a former convict in Ohio. This is the first link in 40 years. A young technician asked, "Is he still alive?" "Yes, he's in Ohio," Briggs replied, pausing briefly. Morning winter light filtered through the window, illuminating the dusty file. The team looked to him, waiting. "We're starting over," he said. That evening, after the team left, Briggs sat alone. On the table, the 1979 black and white photo of Janine Halloran lay beside the new DNA report, 2 eras facing each other. He recalled Mulroney, the veteran detective he'd met at a few industry conferences, who kept a private note. No body, no prints, no chance. Now, 40 years later, that chance had returned. He opened his work notebook, writing the first line of the reinvestigation, January 2020. Case D79114 reopened. DNA evidence recovered. Match, Darren Cole, Ohio, prior homicide record. Status, active. The ink spread faintly on the white page, the handwriting steady and firm. Outside, wind whistled through the Lansing building's windows, snow beginning to fall, silently covering Detroit's streets. A city that once swallowed a person, now facing a memory it had buried for half a century. Briggs spent the morning in Ohio's electronic archive, searching for Darren Cole's old file. After nearly 2 hours, the system returned a digitized set of documents, scanned from handwritten 1963 originals. The header read, "Juvenile Offender, Case #063-217. Offense, double homicide." He opened it. Pages, appearing faded and misaligned. The first image was a boy's face, messy hair, sunken eyes, staring blankly at the camera. Below it, subject: Darren Cole, age 13, Lima County, Ohio. The file detailed a case from May 1963 in a small town called Marion. Darren's stepfather, James Fletcher, 42, a steel worker. His mother, Lorraine Fletcher, 38, a housewife. On the night of May 12, local police received a report of the Fletcher home on fire. When firefighters extinguished it, they found both bodies in the bedroom, the stepfather shot once in the head, the mother dead from smoke inhalation. The coroner's report noted, fire started on the mattress, gasoline odor detected. The only son, Darren, was missing. 2 days later, police found him in an abandoned warehouse 3 miles away, sitting in a corner, wrapped in a blanket, a revolver in front of him. When arrested, Darren didn't resist. The interrogation log noted, when asked where his parents were, subject replied, "They're gone. I burned it so they wouldn't be cold." He said he stayed with the bodies for 2 days, eating dry cereal, listening to the radio, and set the fire when he smelled decay. No tears, no fear. Neighbors reported hearing an argument that night, then 2 short gunshots. One saw flames rise from a second-floor window around midnight. When firefighters arrived, Darren was gone, taking his stepfather's gun and a small bag. The juvenile detention psychiatrist report read, "Subject displays sudden violent tendencies, shows no remorse. When discussing parents, voice calm, occasionally smiling faintly. Exhibits control through silence, signs of obsessive attachment to close figures." Another note at the conclusion, subject completely detaches emotion from action, does not grasp guilt. Darren was sentenced to 8 years at the Marion Juvenile Facility for serious juvenile offenders. There, he was described as model, quiet, disciplined, non-disruptive. In 1968, at 21, he was released. The file noted, rehabilitated, no violent behavior in 8 years. Recommended for post-release supervision, not implemented due to staffing shortages. He changed his surname from Fletcher to Cole and moved to Michigan. The last record was a 1969 work permit copy for a mechanic shop on East Grand Boulevard, Detroit. No further entries followed. Briggs read slowly, a chill running down his spine. The story of a 13-year-old shooting his parents and burning their house, so they wouldn't be cold, made it hard to breathe. He wondered what in a child's mind could shatter all sense of guilt. At the final page, he paused at a crime scene photo, a burned room, blackened walls, a twisted bed frame, and amid the ashes, a pillow with a bullet hole. He placed his hand on the paper, its coldness like metal. The final psychological report was clearly typed: potential for sudden violence, poor emotional control, obsessive tendencies toward close figures, showing a need to absolutize relationships. When feeling abandoned, subject reacts with extreme actions to destroy the source of pain. Briggs read it twice, then wrote in his notebook, "Same fire, same silence." That afternoon, he printed the full file, clipping it to the Halloran case. 2 photos, one of the 13-year-old boy, one of the man in his 70s, confirmed alive by Ohio records, sat side by side. The eyes in both were identical, direct, cold, emotionless. In the quiet room, the printer stopped, leaving only the sound of wind outside the glass. Briggs closed the file, looking out, snow melting on the road, revealing black asphalt, like an old city scar. A buried case was slowly unraveling, and within it, the shadow of the 1963 boy remained, only older and quieter, carrying a fire that never died in his fearless eyes. February 2020. Snow fell lightly on Jefferson Avenue, streetlights casting a weak golden glow on frosted glass. Inspector Leon Briggs and the Cold Case Unit's forensic team returned to the old building where Janine Halloran once lived. After over 40 years, it was a hollow concrete shell, walls stained with mold, windows boarded, and the 2B nameplate nearly faded. As Briggs pushed the door open, the hinges groaned, a damp, cold air rushing out, carrying dust, burnt paint, and memory. Flashlights swept the apartment, cracked ceilings, Water stains on walls, broken tiles, all evoke that December 1979 night when the 25-year-old vanished. Briggs stood in the living room, rereading the old file's notes. Toppled chair, phone cord yanked, radio paused mid-asterisk, dreams asterisk. Now, it was just time's imprint. If she died here, this room still remembers, he said softly, voice hoarse. The tech team began clearing debris, setting up lights, and preparing luminol. They killed all light, leaving thick darkness and the clink of metal spray cans. When the chemical was sprayed on the floor, the room lit up with an eerie blue glow like a ghost's breath. The light spread, pooling across tiles, clinging to walls, reflecting in hundreds of faint, winding streaks. Positive reaction, a technician said quietly. Briggs stepped closer, crouching where the glow was strongest, between the kitchen and living room. The blue flecks formed splatter patterns, a long drag mark, and a wiped smear. She fell here, Briggs said softly. And someone tried to erase it. They sprayed around the doorframe, under cabinets, along walls. Wherever the chemical touched, blue bloomed like cold flowers. Under cracked tiles, faint circular stains appeared, trailing from inside to the door, a body's path. Near the kitchen door, the glow shaped a faint handprint, fingers trailing down. No one spoke. They just watched, letting the blue light recount what 40 years ago went unseen. A technician found a small dark object in a tile crevice near the window. Under a magnifying glass, it was beige fabric, coarse, oil-stained, identical to the sample from the burned Chevy Nova. Same type, the technician said. Industrial carpet used in garages. Briggs nodded. He was here before the car burned. After over 2 hours, the apartment was photographed with infrared cameras. When the lights came back on, the room felt empty, only damp air and faint wet marks on the floor, remnants of a revealed past. Briggs scanned the kitchen, where the luminol had glowed brightest. He pictured it, Janine turning, the chair falling, a blow, blood pooling, then silence. The fluid samples were carefully collected, numbered, and sent for DNA testing. 2 days later, Briggs got the report. DNA matches genetic profile of Janine Halloran, identified from an old hairbrush in family evidence. The final line, in bold, confirmed familial match, 99.9% probability. Briggs read the results in the quiet room, his hand gripping the paper tightly. He knew the blood they found was the final missing piece, the victim's belated testimony. He wrote in his notebook, luminol positive across kitchen floor and north wall. DNA confirmed as victims. Beige fabric matches evidence hash 114 from burned car. Original crime scene, Jefferson Avenue apartment. Late afternoon, the investigation team withdrew. Briggs stayed behind alone in the room, the last sunlight streaming through a broken window, casting onto the gray tiles. He looked around, the place where it all began and where the truth had been buried for 4 decades. The crime happened at home, he said, voice low, almost to himself. The car was just a means of disposal. As Briggs left, he glanced back at the 2B nameplate one last time. The afternoon light fell on it, glinting faintly like a memory. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the staircase, just as it had the night the girl vanished. In the silence of the old building, it was as if dreams still played somewhere, half-finished, incomplete, like the call of a soul finally heard. Mid-March, 2021, the snow in Detroit began to melt, but in Toledo, over 100 miles south, bitter winds from Lake Erie still cut through. Inspector Leon Briggs and 2 Michigan state agents were staying at a small motel on the city's edge. They had been tracking Darren Cole, now 70, for nearly 2 weeks. After 42 years, the former mechanic was a silver-haired old man living quietly in a single-story house on Maplewood, suburban Toledo. He owned a garage specializing in classic car restoration, Cole's Auto Restoration, where photos of him with clients, a glossy red Mustang, and a faded sign reading, "Since 1981" hung. From the outside, he was the picture of a typical American worker, quiet, diligent, polite to neighbors. No one knew he was once at the center of an unsolved Detroit disappearance. Briggs watched him through binoculars from the car. Every morning Darren left home at 8, drank coffee at a small diner down the street, then drove an old pickup to his garage. Evenings, he returned with a grocery bag, exchanged a few words with the mail carrier, and went inside. No visitors, no suspicious activity. "He lives like he never killed anyone," Agent Nolan whispered. Briggs didn't respond. He knew patience was critical at this stage. All they needed was a living sample, a current DNA match to the blood found in the Jefferson Avenue apartment. 3 days later, the opportunity came. On a Friday evening, Darren hosted a small gathering at his garage for friends from a classic car club. When they left, he dumped trash into the bin outside. Beer cans, cigarette packs, used napkins. The surveillance team waited until his house lights went out, then moved. Briggs and Nolan, gloved, opened the bin, collecting anything that might hold biological material: cigarette butts, can lids, a straw with saliva. Everything was sealed on site, labeled, and placed in an insulated box. The process took less than 10 minutes, completely silent, with only the soft sound of snow falling on the car's hood. The next morning, the samples were rushed to Michigan's state lab. For the 7 days awaiting results, Briggs barely slept. He knew if the results matched, the Halloran case would shift from cold case to active homicide. If they didn't, 4 decades of work would dissolve into nothing. On the 8th day, the DNA report arrived via secure channel. The first page, in bold, match confirmed. Below were the identifiers for 2 samples, one from the Jefferson Avenue apartment in 1979, one from the cigarette butt collected in Toledo, March 2021. The 2 matched perfectly across 13 genetic loci, no discrepancies, no chance of coincidence. Briggs read each line slowly, his hand trembling slightly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling, exhaling deeply. He didn't just return to Detroit, he said. He never left his guilt behind. That afternoon, the cold case unit held an urgent meeting. In the Lansing office, Briggs presented the results to representatives from the State Justice Department and the Wayne County prosecutor. Everyone sat silent as the screen displayed the DNA match, 2 red lines perfectly aligned. "We have the blood's confession," Briggs said. "Now we just need a signature." Prosecutor Elaine Porter, who would later lead the prosecution, looked at him, her voice firm. "Draft the arrest warrant. I'll sign it." That night, Briggs returned to the motel, opening the old notebook he'd carried since the Halloran case reopened. Among the smudged ink, he added a line. "DNA sample matched. The truth has spoken. Time to close." Outside the window, snow fell again, blanketing the parking lot in silent white. In Toledo, the silver-haired old man slept soundly in his small house, unaware that justice, after 42 years, was knocking one last time. March 12, 2021, morning. Toledo's sky was thick with gray mist. On a narrow street, lined with old mechanic shops, a row of unmarked black cars quietly pulled up. The FBI, coordinating with Michigan State Police and Ohio's task force, had planned for 3 weeks. They targeted Cole's Auto Restoration, the classic car garage, where Darren Cole, now 70, was the owner. Inside, the sound of a metal grinder mixed with the smell of oil, Darren was wiping paint from a 1967 Mustang's hood, his silver hair falling over his forehead, hands still steady. He had no idea that 6 patrol cars were blocking the exits and 12 officers had surrounded the premises. The arrest warrant was read at exactly 8:17 a.m. A loudspeaker blared across the shop. "FBI. Darren Cole. Drop your tools, hands up." The sound echoed off metal walls, scattering sparrows from the eaves. Darren turned, his eyes pausing for a moment before narrowing, not panicked. He set down the rag, wiped his hands on his jeans, walked slowly to the door, and raised his hands. "What's this about?" His voice was hoarse, chillingly calm. 2 agents approached, cuffing him, reading clearly. You're under arrest by order of Wayne County Court, Michigan, on charges of first-degree murder, victim Janine Halloran, missing since 1979. Darren said nothing. He stood still amid the circle of officers, sunlight glinting off his cuffed wrists. Only the click of a local reporter's camera sounded from the street's edge. Someone had tipped off the press. Briggs stepped forward, long dark coat, eyes weary but sharp. He looked directly at the silver-haired man he'd read about, tracked, and imagined for months. Darren met his gaze, a faint, unreadable smile flickering. Briggs pulled the warrant from his coat, voice rough. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Darren only shrugged. Then asked softly, almost a whisper, have you found her yet? Briggs paused for half a beat, not answering. They led him out of the garage, head bowed, hands still cuffed. As he passed the Mustang, Darren glanced at it one last time. On the shop floor, the concrete bore oil stains, reflecting two men in the dim morning light, an old man and a middle-aged one, linked by 42 years of silence. Outside, wind swept through, carrying dust and the smell of gasoline down the street. Briggs paused, watching, then signaled the officers to take the suspect away. The 4-hour escort from Toledo to Detroit was quiet. Darren sat in the back of the task force vehicle, no leg restraints, eyes fixed through the window, silent. In the transport log, Briggs noted, subject remained silent throughout transfer. No fear, no questions about arrest. Only once, as the car passed a Welcome to Michigan sign, did Darren speak, voice low, I never thought I'd come back here. Briggs, sitting across, didn't take his eyes off him. This place didn't forget you, Darren smiled faintly. No one really remembers until they need to forget. That afternoon, the convoy reached Detroit's police headquarters. News of the arrest spread faster than they did. Reporters crowded outside, lenses aimed at the entrance. As Darren was led out, flashes fired relentlessly. He didn't flinch or lower his head, just raised his eyes to the cameras. A reporter shouted, "Did you kill her?" Darren turned, his gaze cold as steel, saying nothing. Briggs stepped forward, shielding him, and pushed him into the building. In the holding room, as the cuffs were removed, Darren rubbed his wrists, voice calm. How long did it take you to get here? 42 years, Briggs replied. And you weren't going to hide forever. Darren looked up, smiling faintly. No one escapes someone else's memory, do they? Briggs stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. He knew with men like Darren, silence was always their sharpest weapon. That evening, the local news led with the task force vehicle leaving Toledo, a ticker below, Detroit cold case. Arrest after 42 years. On screen, Darren Cole's face appeared, aged, silver-bearded, eyes empty, next to a young Janine Halloran, smiling softly outside the school library. Two images side by side, time overlaying guilt. In the small room at the police station, Briggs sat at his desk, watching the broadcast on an old TV. Outside, light snow fell, clinging to the window in a thin white frost. He clasped his hands, saying softly, "We found you, Darren." As the clock struck 11, Detroit fell silent. In the cell, Darren lay on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, lips moving faintly with words no one could hear. Neon light filtered through the bars, falling on his weathered face. 42 years, a circle closed, not with gunfire or flames, but with the one question he'd asked, "Have you found her yet?" In Briggs' mind, that question echoed like the belated cry of restless souls. The third-floor interrogation room at Detroit Police Headquarters was small, white light glaring on the metal table. Darren Cole sat alone, hands on the table, wrists still marked by cuffs. He'd been silent for nearly 4 hours, occasionally blinking, staring at the blank wall. Briggs sat across, holding a cold coffee. He said nothing more, letting the clock tick, each minute dripping slowly. The only sounds were the creaking ceiling fan and the faint tap of a pencil on the table. Finally, Briggs opened his briefcase, pulling out the old file, yellowed and creased. He placed a black and white photo of Janine Halloran on the table, so lightly it made no sound. Her face stood clear in the light, a tilted smile and gentle eyes, as if staring straight at Darren. He glanced at the photo, his gaze halting for a second, then turned away. Briggs kept his voice even. 42 years. You've been silent long enough. Darren didn't respond. Briggs placed a second photo, the burned Chevy Nova, twisted frame, dried blood by the gear shift. I believe she didn't die in the car. We've proven that. Still silent. Briggs continued slowly, almost a reminder. We found her blood in the Jefferson apartment. We know she died there. Darren's eyebrows twitched faintly, almost imperceptibly. Briggs leaned forward, voice low. You were good at hiding things, but you forgot blood doesn't lie. The room's air thickened. Darren looked at the table, fingers brushing a scratch in the metal. Then he exhaled, a long breath. She wanted to leave me, he said softly, voice hoarse, dry as dust. Briggs didn't react, just waited. I couldn't stand it, Darren continued. She said she didn't want to see me anymore, that I scared her. But she didn't understand. I just wanted her to stay. He paused, eyes fixed on the photo. Briggs opened his notebook, writing each word. That night, Darren said, I went to her apartment. The door wasn't locked. She was listening to music. I just wanted to talk. But she screamed, told me to get out. We argued. I pushed her. He swallowed hard, voice faltering. Her head hit the table. I didn't think she was dead. I shook her, but she didn't move. Not much blood, just a few drops. The room fell silent. Briggs watched him, expression unchanged. Then what did you do? Darren said softly. I cleaned it up. The floor, the walls, everything. I used rags, cleaning solution, like detailing a car after a job. I wasn't thinking, just needed it gone. I carried her to the car. No one saw. It was cold, so cold that night. His voice was flat, emotionless, like recounting an old task. I drove to the Packard plant, poured gas, lit it. I thought fire would erase everything. He gave a faint, dry laugh. But it turns out, it doesn't erase memory. Briggs sat in silence for a long time. He looked into Darren's eyes, seeing not fear but exhaustion, the weariness of someone who had carried a secret too long. He asked slowly, each word deliberate. Where's her body, Darren? The room seemed to freeze. Darren looked up, the light reflecting in his eyes. His lips moved, but no sound came. Briggs didn't break his gaze. You cleaned the blood, burned the car, but you couldn't bury your memory. Where did you hide her? A minute passed, then 2. The clock ticked steadily. Finally, Darren leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. Somewhere no one looks down. Briggs frowned. Where? Darren replied. The old place, behind the steel plant. There's a scrap lot, a patch of land jutting out by a dry ditch. I went there a lot before. He trailed off, saying no more. Briggs kept writing, voice even. You're talking about the River Rouge Steel Works? Darren nodded slightly, eyes vacant. Behind it. No one goes there, just scrap and mud. I buried her there. Put her in a plastic bag, tied with copper wire. I thought no one would ever find her. He paused, took a deep breath, then gave a faint laugh. And no one did. Until now. Briggs closed his notebook, looking up at him. Will you show us the way? Darren leaned back, eyes half closed. If you want to find her, I'll show you. But I'm not doing it out of guilt. I just want to see if you have the guts to look. Briggs nodded, voice low. We'll go, and we'll look. As Briggs left the room, Darren remained seated, hands clasped, staring at Janine's photo on the table. The white light fell directly on his aged face, splitting it, half bright, half shadowed. He said no more, leaving only a final sentence, soft enough for just the recorder to catch. I told you, she didn't want to leave. I just made it true. Outside in the hallway, Briggs paused, looking through the frosted glass of the interrogation room. Darren sat motionless, the light glinting on his silver hair. Briggs opened his phone, calling the field team, his voice quiet but firm. Prepare a movement order. He's going to lead the way. The next morning, under a foggy dawn, The police convoy left Detroit's headquarters, heading south. In the lead vehicle, Darren Cole sat in the back, hands cuffed in front of him. He stared out the window, face expressionless, eyes reflecting the gray morning light. Leon Briggs sat across, silent, the confession transcript folded on his knee. As the car crossed the Ambassador Bridge, wind from the river blew hard, carrying mist and a metallic smell. Darren said softly, as if to no one, "I remember this road. It hasn't changed." Briggs didn't respond. About 40 minutes later, the convoy stopped at the edge of the River Rouge industrial area, a desolate zone once used for steel plant scrap, abandoned since the mid-1980s. It was now cracked earth, weeds, and rusted metal piles high as walls. A rusted crane frame stood stark against the concrete, silent as a monument. The forensic team set up a tent, marked the area, and cameras recorded the process. Briggs approached Darren, uncuffing him to point out the spot. "Where?" he asked. Darren took a few slow steps, eyes scanning the ground. "Over there," he said, pointing west, to a sunken patch half hidden by old scrap. Bricks and metal sheets were moved aside. Beneath the dark, concrete-hard soil, technicians began digging. Each shovel struck with a dry thud, mingling with the wind whistling through broken wires above. Briggs stood nearby, watching every move. Darren sat on a folding chair, hands clasped, head slightly bowed. After nearly an hour, a technician called out, "Something's here." They used brushes and aluminum spoons to clear the remaining dirt. Under LED lights, a cloudy plastic bag emerged, wrapped around something gray-white. Briggs leaned in, heart pounding. The technician carefully peeled back the soil. A long, cracked bone appeared. "Human bone," the examiner said quietly, voice heavy. They paused for a few minutes to photograph, then widened the dig. Beneath the plastic was copper wire, twisted in loops, still green with oxidation. A few inches away, a frayed beige fabric scrap, identical to the one from the 1979 burned car, pressed against the bone. A technician said softly, "Industrial fabric, same type." As the final soil layer was cleared, they uncovered nearly a full skeleton, curled, head tilted to one side. Nothing was intact, but the skull held its shape, and among the brittle finger bones was a broken nail fragment. The team used tweezers to place it in a vial. Briggs stared at the scene, motionless. Wind from the Rouge River swept through, carrying rust and damp earth smells. He heard the constant click of cameras, the scratch of pens on reports. Darren looked up, eyes half closed, face blank. No one spoke. Finally, Briggs stepped closer, asking, "Why this place?" Darren shrugged, voice low. "No one looks down at a place like this. My whole life, I never saw anyone stop here." He looked at the sky, giving a tired smile. Briggs met his gaze, voice dry. "You were wrong, we're looking." The collection continued into the afternoon. Each bone was placed in a separate bag, numbered, labeled. The plastic around the hip bone was torn but sufficient for analysis. Surrounding soil was sampled for trace evidence. In the small vial, the nail fragment was sent to the genetics lab. When preliminary results returned, the report read, "DNA trace, male contributor, Darren Cole." Briggs held the printout, reading each word slowly. Under comparative analysis, the conclusion, female remains consistent with Halloran, Janine. Match probability, 99.9%. He took a deep breath, folded the paper, eyes on the now tarped site. That afternoon, low sunlight swept the industrial zone. Melted snow formed thin puddles, light reflecting off rusted steel. The tech team packed up. Police sealed the area. Briggs sat on a concrete step by the car, writing in the report. Female remains found at scrap lot behind River Rouge Steelworks. Identified victim Janine Halloran. Accompanying evidence includes beige fabric, copper wire, plastic bag, nail fragment with Darren Cole's DNA. 42 years of waiting ended. He signed it, then looked into the distance, where Darren was being escorted to the car by two officers. He turned back, their eyes meeting briefly, no longer defiant, just empty. Briggs stood, watching. The car door closed with a soft thud. In that moment, wind from the river shook the tarp over the dig site. A small corner of the plastic bag caught the light, glinting in the afternoon glow, then sank back into shadow. The city hummed in the distance, but here, where time had been held for 4 decades, only silence remained. April 2023. Wayne County Court was packed. In the gallery, reporters, law students, and those who'd followed Janine Halloran's case for years sat in silence. Outside, Detroit's air was still chilly, late snow dusting the stone steps. Inside, white light illuminated Darren Cole's aged face, now 73, silver hair, wrinkled skin, hands trembling slightly. He sat still in a gray prison shirt, eyes vacant. Across the room, prosecutor Elaine Porter stood, placing a nearly 2-inch thick file before her, voice ringing clear in the stark space. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for 42 years, Janine Halloran's name was just a line in a missing persons file. But today, we have answers. We have a confession, matching DNA, evidence from the scene, and remains excavated at River Rouge Steel Works. No more doubts, no more theories, only one truth. Darren Cole killed that girl on the night of December 10, 1979, and burned her car to hide the crime. She opened the file, pulling out photos, the Jefferson Avenue apartment glowing blue under luminol, the burned Chevy Nova, and the nail fragment with the defendant's DNA. Each image flashed on a large screen. The courtroom was so quiet the rustle of paper echoed. Porter pointed at the defendant. This man lived 42 more years after taking a life. He changed his name, built a business, lived as if the past didn't exist. But evidence never dies. Defense attorney Martin Hale stood, thin, calm, voice soft. Your Honor, we don't deny the act. Mr. Cole admitted his actions and led authorities to the burial site, unprompted. This is the act of a man seeking to end his conscience, not a cold-blooded killer. For 42 years, he lived honestly, with no further crimes. I ask the court to consider his voluntary disclosure of the body, reducing the charge from first-degree to second-degree murder, unintentional, in a conflict. The courtroom murmured. Porter stepped forward, voice sharp and cold. 42 years of silence isn't remorse, ladies and gentlemen. It's 42 years of evasion. While Janine Halloran lay in cold earth, he lived, worked, celebrated birthdays. That's not a conscience, that's the privilege of a killer walking free. Today, that privilege ends. She turned to the jury. If he was truly remorseful, he would have spoken in 1979, not waited until faced with his own DNA. Darren sat still, eyes on the table. He never glanced at the jury or the prosecutor. When the judge asked for his final statement, he stood, voice so soft the microphone amplified it. I have nothing to say. They found her. That's enough. The brief words fell like an iron door closing. Porter returned to the podium, closing her argument. The evidence is clear. The victim's blood was found in the apartment. The defendant's DNA was in the car and at the burial site. His confession matches the scene. There's no room for doubt. We're not just trying a man. We're giving a voice back to a girl whose voice was taken. She bowed her head, then looked straight at the jury. Justice may come late, but it comes. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury retired to the jury room. 12 members, 8 men, 4 women, discussed for 6 hours. No one left, no laughter, just papers passed back and forth. The image of remains under scrap earth, vivid in their minds. At 9 p.m., they returned. The foreperson stood, voice grave. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant Darren Cole guilty of first-degree murder. The word guilty rang clear, heavy as a stamp on the past. Darren showed no reaction, only blinked, nodding slightly as if he'd known. Briggs, in the prosecution's gallery, exhaled deeply. He looked to the stands, where Janine's mother once sat in old hearings, now marked by a bouquet of flowers. The judge delivered the final sentence. Given the severity and duration of evasion, defendant Darren Cole is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The sentence begins immediately. The gavel struck 3 times, echoing off cold stone walls. Darren lowered his head as 2 officers escorted him out. Passing Porter, he paused briefly, saying softly, "She's still in my dreams every night." Porter looked straight at him, replying, "That's a punishment no prison can give you." Reporters spilled outside, flashes blinding on the steps. The next morning's Detroit Free Press front page blared, "Justice after 42 years, cold case closed." A photo showed Darren, head bowed between 2 officers, Wayne County Courthouse snow-dusted behind him, and below, Janine Halloran's old photo, her tilted smile by the library door. In the small Lansing Cold Case Unit office, Briggs folded the photocopied sentence, placing it on a shelf beside the closed file. He wrote the final line in his investigation log, 42 years, 1 city, 2 lives. Closure isn't to forget, but to remember. He closed the notebook, looking out the foggy window. Detroit lay quiet outside, snow falling lightly, as if to erase traces, but couldn't. Justice might arrive late, but it always finds the right door. The story of Detroit's 1979 cold case isn't just a journey to reclaim justice for a forgotten woman. It reflects a profound part of American society today, where faith in justice, truth, and human resilience remains an irreplaceable moral foundation. The evidence preserved for over 40 years, bag #114, beige fabric, dried blood, symbolizes the value of long-term responsibility. In a fast-moving modern America, where everything changes daily, this story reminds us that what's kept with care and conscience is never in vain. That physical evidence enabled the cold case unit to reconstruct the truth, just as the persistence and integrity of people like Leon Briggs prove that time may fade memory, but it cannot erase justice. In today's America, where values of trust, fairness, and professional ethics are sometimes tested, the Halloran story reminds us of personal responsibility to truth. Briggs wrote in his journal, "No case is dead, only people give up too soon." A powerful reminder that failure often comes not from circumstances, but from stopping too early. In work, community, or justice, patience and honesty remain the most enduring weapons. If every American, from police officer to teacher to ordinary citizen, holds the belief that truth is worth waiting for, there will be no more cold cases, not just in storage rooms, but in our collective conscience. Thank you for joining us on this over 4-decade journey to witness justice awakened in the heart of Detroit. Subscribe to our channel to follow more cold case stories, where truth always waits to be found, no matter how much time passes.